a chat with Glendora, a show for living right. A chat with Glendora makes your day so bright. Words of inspiration, jokes to make you smile. Come relax and chat with Glendora for a while.
So there were constantly issues with people, with animals being electrocuted, with shocks, with all sorts of issues. So the light rail went for about 30 years in good force. At the height of their period of being in use, they had over 3 million passengers, which is a astounding amount of passengers for a year, considering the village of Nassau at the time maybe had 1,000 people, and they're talking millions of passengers. But it was very inexpensive. You could get to Albany in 35 minutes. It was fast. It transported...
How did they go across the Hudson?
On a bridge.
On the Dunn Memorial Bridge?
This is before the Dunn Memorial. There was another bridge called the Rensselaer Bridge. And they went up, crossed the river, and went up through Clinton Heights, through East Greenbush, through Schodack, came over through East Schodack, came down along where you are here, continued from Nassau to North Chatham, to Kinderhook, to Valatia, Kinderhook, and then down eventually to Hudson. It also transported milk. A lot of dairy farmers in the area. They would get their cans of milk in the morning to the platform. The train would stop, put milk on, and away it would go. A lot of items were produced here, grown here, for sale to New York City.
Do you know where in Rensselaer the bridge was?
Yes, I do. South of the current Dunn Memorial Bridge.
And it came into Albany, south of where the Dunn Memorial Bridge comes in?
Yes. And
where the Delaware Hudson is?
Where the Delaware and Hudson is.
The railroad?
That's farther up. Yep. So it was right across from Rensselaer. And that replaced a ferry, by the way. Anyway, so we have all these people coming to Nassau and being able to travel back and forth on the trolley cars. Then, fortuitously, a business that was located in the adjoining town in Schodack, maybe 4 miles out of the village in the town in Schodack, on what we call Bunker Hill, was a piano action factory. And German immigrants who had been in the business successfully in New York City came to this area for vacation, believe it or not. They had enough money that they could have a vacation. And they took a coach ride in the countryside to see what it looked like in this place called Albany. And they happened upon Schodack. And there was a house that had a beautiful flower garden. And the wife of the man, Mr. Frickinger, was very interested in growing flowers. She had the wagon stopped, the coach stopped, and got out and started looking at the flowers. And they were talking back and forth with the person who lived in the house. So they relayed that they were considering relocating up here and wondered if there were any buildings that could be modified for commercial use, and just so happens that the man knew of something. So they built their factory on Bunker Hill. At that time it was Frickinger and Grub, G-R-U-B-B, sometimes called Grub, and they employed many individuals. Now, piano action, for those of you who don't know, when you press the key on a piano, inside there's a whole bunch of levers and mallets that hit the strings and make the sound on the right note. That's the piano action. That's what they built. They did not construct entire pianos, but they built actions for upright pianos, for grand pianos, and for...
They were rolls with holes on them?
That's a player piano. That was one of the reasons they went out of business, because now you didn't have to learn how to play the piano. You could get a player piano and buy a roll and have entertainment, but that's... You're stealing the story here. So they were very, very successful for many years, until there was a fire. So what do you use to hold the piano actions together? The felt, the wood dowels, glue. Is glue flammable? Yes, very flammable. So somebody left the glue pot on overnight, the factory burned down.
Oh.
by that time, another family had gotten involved who lived here in the village, the Cozy Gardens, who were also German immigrants, who also had a background in manufacturing, and they brought interest into the Frickinger and Grube piano factory. Mr. Frickinger retired, Mr. Grube stayed on, and it became Cozy Garden and Grube, and then eventually just Cozy Garden. And they manufactured pianos up until 1924 here in the village. As many as 5,000 piano actions a year, employed hundreds of people. In 1915, based on the 1915 New York State Census, 40% of the adult population of the village of Nassau in some way was connected to that factory.
How do you spell Cozy Garden?
Very carefully. Kosegarten. Cozy Garden.
Garden in German is garden, but what is cozy in German?
I'm not sure what cozy is. We'll have to look that one up.
Cozy.
By the mid-1920s, people were tuning in to the wireless, to their radio. And because they could get entertainment from a radio, they could buy a piano player, a player piano. Sales were falling, and in 1924 they put the property up for sale. They said it was valued at $40,000. If you had $10,000 in cash, you could buy that property. They were unable to sell it for 5 years. At the time, it was fireproofed because they learned their lesson from the factory that burned. So it had brick walls with fire doors. It was modern construction. It had its own water system. It had its own sprinkler system. The water tower that was part of the factory, also on the top of it, had the bell that was rung when there was a fire in the village of Nassau, because it was at the highest point in the village of Nassau. So that brings us through about the Depression era. And once that Depression hit, the railroad went out of business in 1929.
Yep.
The fair continued on pretty well. The pianos were out. Things weren't looking too good until war. That brought new business. It certainly made Route 20 a very important highway back and forth. Army convoys would go on Route 20. And Nassau has continued to be a transportation hub. Route 20 is still considered an important means of traffic. And then after World War II, because you now had GIs who had access to credit to the GI Bill, they were able to purchase a home. So there was a contractor here in Nassau who basically built prefab houses, and the initial construction was done in the piano factory. He leased the piano factory to do the basic construction and then moved it to the site. So we have 3 developments here in the village. One behind St. Mary's Roman Catholic Church, one on Route 203 called Orchard Park, and one southwest of the village called Brookview. Those areas were all built by the same area. There were new houses. They were in the $5,000 to $7,000 price range. They were sold on credit. No sellers. Actually, the ones on behind St. Mary's, the development, they had very novel for the time underfloor heating, and some of the houses still have that heating in there. So with that influx of new residents to the village, the population increased, but we pretty much have maxed out the amount of space. Here on your street, the newest residential building was built in 1925.
Was one of those builders Wood? Was his name Wood?
He was a builder, but he wasn't involved with the early.
Oh, he was later?
Days. He was later, yeah. And most of those people who did the development moved on to other locations. They didn't stay in Nassau. They built until they felt they had built what the market would accept, and they continued on.
But now, please, I'm confused. What is a piano action?
Piano action.
Was it a piano they sold?
Well, it went into a piano. It was the mechanical mechanism that allowed someone to push a key on the keyboard and have the proper string, because remember, piano is like a harp. You have all of these different strings tuned for different notes.
Yeah.
So if you push a B flat on the keyboard, you want to make sure that B flat strum is hit, and that is the action. Lots of little hammers and springs.
And what did it look like?
Well, depending on how many keys there were, 88 keys, 100 keys, it was quite large. Metal framework. They had a foundry because there were iron support bars on this thing. I'm sure they had to have weighed 40, 50, 60 pounds.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah. And they shipped the raw materials in on the trolley and shipped the finished works out on the trolley.
Must have been expensive.
For the time, they were expensive. Yes, for someone to buy a piano, just like today, it would be considered pretty expensive.
And what made the action?
Pushing the key, and then that got through a series of levers and springs. The force of pushing the key down translated into a felt mallet hitting that particular string. You have a look of.
But what made it go from one note to another?
You would push the different keys. Each key is a different note. Now I learned the other night that you played melodica. So that has keys on it. Each key is a different note. Same concept in a piano. So you push A, B, C, and you follow along with the notation, and that changes the striking pattern. And if you want 2 notes fast, you go push, push. If you want 4 notes, push, 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 push. And each one of those has to work that hammer in exact synchronized with your finger. But we're not here to talk about music theory, are we? Let's talk about the Nassau. So here we are.
No, here in Nassau,
Yes.
is there a relic of one? Is there?
There was a relic of one in the last of the Cozy Garden boys' house, and I photographed it. So if someone were come to my slideshow on Friday, March 15th at the Grace United Methodist Church on Church Street, you will be able to see a picture of that piano.
What time?
That's a good question. 7 p.m.
7 p.m.?
It is what I call illustrated talk. I'll ramble on about different things, but to pictures and maps and photographs and renderings. Admission is free. Refreshments will be served, and it's presented by our local historical society, the Esquitock Historical Society.
Oh, it's through Esquitock?
So that's Friday, March 15th. Now the 12th is actually the anniversary day. That's a Tuesday. And we are hoping to do a few things if the weather cooperates. If not, they'll get moved up to the weekend.
I would go over that again. That's
Friday, March 15th, presentation, Nassau at 200 years. I will be giving an illustrated talk, 7 p.m., Grace United Methodist Church, Church Street, Route 20. Free admission, refreshments, and it's presented by Esquitock. And then the next day, Saturday the 16th, at the Village Hall at 40 Malden Street, Nassau, we'll have a display of photos, artifacts, and curiosities from Nassau's past. So this will be a place where you can get up close and see things that maybe are covered in the slideshow, maybe not. For example, we have a Rochert Bottling Works Nassau, New York bottle. Now, here in Nassau, we had a soda water factory from the 1880s until Prohibition. And the family name was Rochert. And there were a number of Rochert enterprises. One had a lumber yard, one had a hotel, and one had a bottling works. The problem is, however, while they all had children, they had female children. So the name Rochert doesn't exist anymore, but there are some.
How do you spell it?
R-O-S-H-I-R-T. Rochert.
Is that Dutch or German?
That's German. Yep.
That's German?
Yep. And then, here's another, whoops, my artifacts are going over. This is a sign that was on the building across the street from me forever, and it says wagons, carriages, and agricultural implements for sale by H. Ostrom, Nassau, New York. So it's a period advertising sign from, I would guess 1900, 1910. Not that old, but certainly not new. The company is long gone. But Nassau was a center of wagon making, sleigh making, carriage making, harness making. All of that was done right here in Nassau Village. And we'll have some tools from the Hermance. I told you about Hermance being one of the signers of the incorporation papers.
That's right.
From his family's factory that was on Malden Street. And
What did they make?
They made wagons. Wagons, sleighs, anything that a horse would pull. And we'll have a lot of photographs, some maps, some early maps of Nassau. It's very easy because the street layouts have not changed. You can see what was in your house lot 150 years ago, 200 years ago.
I think you should go, folks, because now you will see how much better things are today than they were then.
I tried to get a privy, but no one would let me borrow their privy. So we have some other events throughout the year. Would you like me to tell you about those?
I would, but what was that about, a privy?
A privy.
A privy, oh, okay.
Yeah. I tried to get a privy, but we weren't successful.
Yes, please tell us about the other events.
All right, on Saturday, May 18th, we'll feature all the talented people who live in Nassau, an open mic talent competition, and that'll be at the Village Commons, our little park, in the gazebo.
What's the prize?
A prize, just the honor of performing.
Oh, I see. You said a competition. I thought it meant
Well,
a prize.
someone will be anointed as the best.
Okay.
We hope. On Saturday, June 1st, now this is one they're dying to get in, a walking tour of the Nassau Skodak Cemetery. And that will be 11 o'clock in the morning. Hopefully it'll be a nice day. So we will go through the graveyard, and I will lead that, and we'll point out who some of the families are that grew up in Nassau and developed Nassau.
What is the date of that cemetery? When did it start?
Well, that cemetery is not that new. It was in the 1840s that they built that. Basically because the village was expanding over all of the little previously organized family graveyards. So they felt that the property, instead of being the family graveyard, would be better off if they could sell it to someone to build a house or build a farm or whatever. As we know about the graveyard that would have been across the street from you here, the Hogue family graveyard. Allegedly,
tell me about that. I don't know about that.
Well, you have to come to this program. Well, the Hogues were here for many generations, and they had their own graveyard, as was the custom. There was no central graveyard. None of the churches had graveyards.
Well, where was it?
It was
behind my property?
Back along this stretch here. And when it was developed, supposedly the graves were disinterred and taken down to the new cemetery and reburied. But it's funny, there's no
Was
Hogues
it
down
on
there.
that side of Elm Street?
No, on this side,
Behind me?
farther towards the center.
Wow. Well, Jonathan Hogue lived in Kinderhook.
He lived in a couple places, but he had children that lived here, and then they had children.
Oh.
So, and then...
he lived at the end of the street.
Yes. July 4th, we have our annual community 4th of July lunchtime picnic at the Village Commons, 10 to 2, with a reading of the Declaration of Independence. And then something very interesting here on Elm Street in July 11th, 12th, and 13th, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, an archaeological dig. Explore the history beneath our feet, right here in Nassau. A resident found some interesting things in her backyard.
That's you, Melody.
And she just happens to be an amateur archaeologist, and she recognized what these things were, and we don't know why they were there. So we're going to have a full-blown dig with professional archaeologists, and they're going to document everything. And there are going to be opportunities for young people through the library and older folks to come to definitely to watch what's going on, but also to get involved in some of the work that it takes to take something out of the ground and document it and make sure everyone knows where it is. On Saturday, July 20th, a block dance at the Nassau Fire Company. chicken barbecue. Oh, here's another new event that we're having on Elm Street. Elegance, E-L-E-G-A-N-Z, Elegance on Elm. And that's going to be between the hours of 4 to 7 p.m. That will be musical entertainment on some of the porches of the nicer houses. Not that they're not all nice, but some of the historic old houses on Elm Street with small acoustic musical groups performing. People will be invited to bring their lawn chairs, their blankets to spread out on the lawn. We'll have food for sale, we'll have drinks for sale, and hopefully we'll have nice weather. 3 different types of music. 1, 2, 3 performers, nothing over the top, and just a chance to sit back, enjoy the music, meet your neighbors, talk to your friends, and enjoy the architecture on Elm Street, which we don't often see. Then we have 2 other events that we've had every year, the Nassau Fest in September, beginning of September, the Oktoberfest at the end of September, and then the grand finale of the Bicentennial year on Saturday, October 19th, the Historians Ball. And I invite you all to the Historians Ball, Saturday, October 19th, 5 p.m. at the Burden Lake Country Club, which is in the town of Nassau.
Oh, that's that way.
That's that way. Back where Totem Lodge used to be years and years and years ago. So we invite people. Most of the events are free, almost everything except the Historians Ball is free, or if you wish to purchase items.
We didn't tell you that he was the chairman of the Bicentennial.
That is true. So,
and also
Glendora, that is my story. That we welcome people to Nassau. Lots of folks used to live here and have moved away, and I hear from them, and that's wonderful. And then there's the website. Oh, I can't forget the website. Nassau, N-A-S-S-A-U, 12123.com. Nassau, 12123.com. The 12123 is our zip code. And there's a joke about that. I think I've told you the joke.
Go ahead.
So why does Nassau have the zip code 12123?
Why?
Well, when they were handing out zip codes back in the 1970s, they figured Nassau, Nassau, New York, that's as high as they can count, 1, 2, 3. Then they had to have 5 numbers, so they repeated it. Nassau, 12123.com. It's the newsletter of the Village Beautification Committee.
The Village Green.
The Village Green is the name of it, correct? A volunteer organization that tries to keep things nice in Nassau and do things for folks. And
they plant beautiful flowers at the entrance. And we plant flowers.
Oh, that's another thing. This spring, we're hoping that all those tulips, 1,000 tulip bulbs, were given away last fall for planting in people's yards to come up this spring. Now, today it happens to be 17 degrees out, so the tulips aren't coming up today. But in a few more weeks, the tulips will come up, and we hope Nassau will be filled with red Dutch tulips. How's that?
Yeah.
So, I lost my train of thought here. Nassau 123. Oh, so in the newsletter, in the website, I occasionally will come up with somebody who has a question about local history. My grandfather used to live here. What was the name of this? That there used to be some so-and-so business in Nassau. So I've got about 30 different 2-3 page articles with photographs, with artifacts about specific topics here in Nassau. So if you are from Nassau or are interested in Nassau, take a look at that. The things that are most popular tend to be within somewhat recent memory. We once upon a time here had a one-man police department, and the officer was very enthusiastic about our speed limit, and Nassau became known and is still known as a speed trap.
Oh, yeah.
Nice article about Doc Avery, Wider. Delson's department store, which was our answer to Walmart or Kmart for years and years and years. An interesting history there. Nassau School, the trolley cars, the piano factories, Nassau in World War I, Nassau in the Civil War. So a lot of information, some material that you won't find anywhere else. And then, of course, there's the book. We have a few books that are available at the Nassau Library. Early History of Nassau Village by Mr. Huey and Mr. Phillips, 1609, 1830, and that's very, very good for early information.
Yeah, I like
And then part of the Images of America, a newer book, several years ago, a picture book of Nassau that if there was a picture taken It's in there, 120 some pictures with
That's your
very
book.
explicit captions. Oh, that's right, that is my book, yeah. So Glendora, thank you so much for this opportunity.
Well, now, go over it again. What is a bicentennial? A 200-year celebration?
A commemoration of 200 of something. So in this case, it's 200 years since the foundation and incorporation of the village of Nassau. So in New York State, hamlets can choose to become incorporated as their own governing body. So we have a mayor, we have a board of trustees, we have our own little government within the town of Nassau, which has its government within the county of Rensselaer, which has its government within the state of New York.
Well, why do hamlets want to do that? Why do they want to become incorporated? What's the big advantage?
Well, primarily the big advantage is self-rule. They want to have a say in how their community is structured, whether it be for zoning rules, for development rules. Generally, it's a quality of life issue. Maybe they want to have street lights. Maybe they want to have public water. Those are all things that over the years Nassau did since incorporation.
Well, that means more taxes.
But you're getting something for your taxes. Now, why did East Nassau incorporate?
Because they didn't want to mine.
Because they didn't want a gravel mine, correct?
That,
So usually in recent years it has been because they want to prevent something. I think way back when in 1819 they wanted to basically organize the village for growth and development and have a structure in which to do it.
Now, this seems to be very much a New York thing. I didn't used to hear about this in New England. You have so many village of Nassau and town of Nassau, village of this, town of that.
Mm-hmm.
This seems to be a New York thing, am I
Could
right?
be, it could be, I'm not sure. I think obviously Massachusetts, New England is much older, and they have towns there that go back to the 1600s. So 1819 is relatively new compared to the South Shore, the North Shore of Boston. You know, those are all very, very old.
Now, I also hear about unincorporated villages. What are those?
Well, in New York, and I believe, I could be mistaken, but legally I don't think there is such a thing as an unincorporated village. There's a hamlet, is what we call them.
Oh, is that the same thing?
Same thing, yeah.
Oh.
So basically, a hamlet would be geographic center of a bunch of people and related buildings, etc. And they may have a unique name, may have a unique history.
Is there any relationship between this Nassau and Nassau, New York?
Nassau County?
Yeah, Nassau County, Long Island?
None whatsoever, although Nassau County was named for the Dutch royal family.
It was?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And this Nassau 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, it's a dance step, see? It's 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 1, 2.
I never thought of that. It'd be like the cha-cha-cha.
Yeah, yeah. Would there be anything else?
I think we have pretty much covered it.
Mm-hmm.
If someone really wants to inquire, they can certainly send an email to you at...
Yeah, they can do that.
And what is your email address?
A chat with Glendora